Hi. This is the second episode of my life, and today I want to talk about my brother Tom. There are two people in our family. There's me and there's my brother Tom, and he is 22 months older than I am. So he's about 2 years older. And I was told by my parents that when they brought me home from the hospital in 1949, that my brother looked at me and said, "Great, now I have a baby brother to play with." It was a short time later, probably within a couple of years, that my brother contacted polio. Now this probably was around 1950, 1951, and it was before the Salk vaccine for polio became available. That didn't become available until maybe 1954. And I'm told parents around that time in the early 50s were on edge whenever their young child got a fever or a cold because they didn't know if it was polio. Polio is a virus, and I've been told it attacks the muscles. And in my brother's case, it attacked his lower left leg muscle, and it died. And that stunted its growth. So even now, my brother, his left leg is about a half an inch smaller than his right leg. But my dad worked at Ford's at the time, and Henry Ford Hospital, I think, was still related to the Ford Motor Company at that time. Anyway, his insurance was pretty good insurance, although I'm sure it cost him thousands of dollars back then just to treat my brother. The doctor there at Henry Ford Hospital, which is in downtown Detroit, so that was at least about a half an hour drive for my mom every time she took him to the doctor, was Dr. Fleming, and he was a great foot surgeon. I guess one of the best in the U.S. And what he did is he took a muscle from somewhere else on my brother and attached it, or he took the dead muscle off and then he reattached the good muscle. So that really helped. My brother did have 3 major operations. That whole thing took place over these 3 operations, and so for a long time he was in a cast from the upper part of his left leg all the way down to the ankle well, really to the foot of the left leg. But he was pretty happy as a kid. Now, we lived in Detroit near 6 Mile and Woodward, and our elementary school was only a half a block away. It was Greenfield Park Elementary School, and we lived in the middle of the block. So we only had a half a block to go to get to school. Well, what my mom would do is put him in a red wagon and then pull the wagon the half a block to the school. Now, we had sidewalks back then, but because this was an old neighborhood, I mean, the houses were like 6 feet apart. Fortunately for us, there was a couple of sites on our street that they just had a field to them. So, and ours was one of those. But next to us, the next house was only about 6 feet away, and then we had an open lot on the other side. But the sidewalks were cement, but they were old sidewalks, and so some of the trees had pushed up the sidewalk a little bit. So when my mom would hit one of those, she would have to really pull hard to get it over that little barrier. Well, every once in a while, my brother would take his crutches and just boom, plant them down right on the sidewalk, and my mom would be pulling and pulling and pulling, and then she turned around and she saw my brother, and he's there smiling, and she really couldn't get mad at him. But she did that for quite a while, well, whenever he was in a cast. He was a pretty happy kid, even with that. The last time he had an operation where he had this body cast on, I guess, at school there were two playgrounds. There was the little playground, which was for the younger kids mostly, and then there was the big playground, which was for the older kids. And what happened is that I was playing on the small playground and my brother was on the big playground. Well, I kind of looked over there because you could see from one playground to another, and I saw a whole circle of kids. So I knew something was going on, like a fight or something, and so I ran over there, and I just saw the end of this where one guy had gotten in front of my brother and another guy got behind him and he knelt down, and then the one kid pushed my brother and of course he fell over the other kid, and then the two kids each took one of his crutches and they threw it across the playground. Now, we had monitors out there, there were teachers, and by the time I got there and I saw the very end of this, the teachers had arrived, and I started tearing out after one of the kids, and one of the teachers stopped me, and it's probably a good thing because he was an older kid and he probably would have beat the heck out of me, but I was just furious, and this one teacher stopped me and said, well, did you see who did it? And I said, yeah. She said, well, can you point him out or tell me his name? I said, well, I don't know his name. And by then he had already left. And the teachers asked a few of the other kids around there, and they wouldn't say anything. So I went and I got my brother's crutches and brought him back to him. But that is something that has always stuck with me. You know, it just has stuck with me. But then a few years later, when my brother was all out of crutches and no cast anymore, he was kind of an overweight guy, and he was big for his age at the time, but he didn't really know how to fight. Well, because he was my older brother, I kind of started to smart off around some of the other kids when he was around. I know it was a terrible thing to do, but I did it. And we'd be playing baseball and one guy would say, hey, I threw you out. And I would say, no, you didn't. And he would say, yes, I did. You want to make something of it? And I would say, don't push me. Just don't push me. And I'd get right in his face. And of course, my brother would come running up, which I knew he would do. And he would say, hey, don't pick on my brother. And then they would get into a fight, and my brother always lost the fight. He never said anything to me, but my dad pulled me aside one time, or he pulled my brother and me aside, and he said to my brother, he said, it's good that you're defending your little brother. Always defend him. Then he pulled me aside and he says, what are you doing? Are you nuts? You're getting your brother into fights. Stop it. Did I let that stop me? No. I kept getting my brother into fights, and so finally my dad said, okay, I'm going to teach Tom how to fight. He taught Tom how to fight. The next time I got my brother into a fight, Tom won. He beat the guy. It was Louis Barbado, the guy one of the two guys that had always beat him up. Then the next time he got into a fight with a guy who lived on the block, Ricky Evans, my brother won again. And Ricky always beat Tom up. Well, a couple more times, and Tom was always winning, and by this point I was getting old enough to where I kind of said, you know what, this is not cool what I'm doing, so I stopped doing it. But one thing I learned from that is you always protect your own. And my brother always protected me. He always fought for me. Even when he knew I was wrong, and I was wrong so many times, he wouldn't let bigger kids pick on me. And my dad, in saying that, taught me a really good lesson, and that is, you stick up for your own, you defend them. Even when they're wrong, you don't let people beat up on them. Well, a few years later, when my brother was 14, he got sugar diabetes. And what happened is our elementary school went up through the 8th grade. It was a very old style elementary school. And then for the 9th grade, we went to another school, which was a Nolan Junior High School, and then we both went to Cass Tech from there. Well, my brother was 2 grades ahead of me, so when he was going into the 9th grade, I was going into the 7th grade. We were at separate schools. And on a Sunday night, my cousin Greg came down, his family did, and so Greg, Tom, and I went to a movie. And at the movie, Tom was just eating a whole bunch of popcorn and drinking a lot of drinks, and I thought, wow, he's really hungry. Well, we got home that night, and Greg and his family left, and we went to bed, and in the morning, Tom woke up and he felt sick. And me, being the sensitive brother that I am, said to my mom, oh, he's faking it. He's just trying to get to stay home from school because he's a little tired. And Mom said, no, I don't think he's faking it. So I went to school, and then about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I got called down to the principal's office. And you never got called down to the principal's. I mean, it wasn't a good thing to get called down to the principal's office. But I figured, hey, I haven't done anything wrong. And they sat me down and they said, your mother's going to come and pick you up in a few minutes. And I said, okay, why? And they said, because your brother's in the hospital. They couldn't tell me anything. They just said it was pretty serious. So she's coming to pick me up. Well, they didn't have to tell me that. I figured if my mom is going to take me out of school, this is serious. I felt terrible. Because just that morning I had said, oh, he's not sick, he's just faking it. So we get to the hospital, and the emergency room doctor there said, well, we've done some blood tests, but back in those days, blood tests took 4 and 5 hours to get done. And they said, we can't really know anything till the blood tests come in, but he said, would your son want to skip school for some reason? And my mom said, absolutely not. He likes school, he doesn't do that. Then our doctor came in, Dr. Berndorf, and this guy was a great diagnostician. I've never seen anybody that was as good as he was. And he just took one look at my brother and he says, this boy's sick. He says, I want him on glucose right now. That was a really good thing, because it was another 2.5 hours before the blood test came back, and my brother was in a coma at this time. By putting him on the glucose, he hydrated him, and it stabilized his sugar, and it brought him out of the coma. And almost as soon as he was awake, they got the blood test back, and it showed his sugar was sky high. It was 480. The normal is between 80 and 120. And Dr. Berndorf was right. It was sugar diabetes. And so he sat my mom and dad down, and my dad was there at that point. And he said, your son has sugar diabetes. He said, does anybody else in your family have it? Well, over the next week or two, they found out it was heavy on both sides, my mom and my dad's side. So he told us, he said, well, it is hereditary. It tends to not skip a generation, but he said, Tom has sugar diabetes, so Dave probably will never get it. So, and this was type 1, which they just called it juvenile diabetes at that point, but it's now called type 1. He said, now, Dave's kids may get it, but none of my kids have got it. So apparently it's a very recessive gene in me. And when my brother was living at home, my mom managed his diabetes pretty well. He did go into several reactions, usually for a low sugar, not a high sugar, but usually a low sugar. And he would get kind of confused, and then he would spasm and just fall down. And we knew what to do. We knew to give him some powdered sugar. We always had that by. We either dabbed it under his tongue or we took a spoon and put it in his mouth, and he would generally come out of it within maybe 15 minutes or so. But we would always take him to the hospital. When he moved out, he didn't do such a good job, and there were many times where he went into, sometimes it was a high sugar, sometimes it was a low sugar, but he had both of those things going against him, and that's a rough thing. Sometimes when I have allergies, or I used to get headaches fairly often, and I used to, in my own mind, I used to say, wow, why do I have all this stuff? And then I think the Lord would remind me, hey, your brother's had it a lot worse. And when he would do that, I would kind of say, okay, all of a sudden allergies and a few headaches aren't that bad. So my brother has always stood by me and supported me, especially when I was younger. There was a time when, after he moved out, where we weren't as close as we had been, and but I'll tell you about that a little later. Okay, and that does it for this.